Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. I'm not sure if anyone can hear me. Can you put in the comments if you can hear me, please? Because I think my microphone might not be working. My PC just crashed as I started this stream. So if you can hear me, please forgive me for the slight delay. We can, hello, we can hear you. Okay, great. My PC just literally blue screened on me as I started this stream. But thankfully it restarts really quickly when it does that. So I'm really sorry if you felt that you were waiting a bit longer than you would have liked. Let's see if we can pick up where we left off. Okay, so welcome everyone. I just need to get all my ducks in a row. Welcome everyone to this discipline deep dive with Intergames. Today we're going to be talking specifically on the subject of level design. Thank you, by the way, everyone in comments who's sort of answered positively. I really appreciate that. It gives me a lot more confidence just to get on with things, and then I can worry about all the other stuff later. So today we're delivering a discipline deep dive into level design specifically. If this is your first time attending one of these events, what these discipline deep dives are sort of designed to do is they are an event series by us at Intergames, where we basically recognise that to do an entry role in the games industry, there are a lot of sort of like pre-assumed knowledges and experiences and skills that someone needs to have before they can kind of really just get into those roles. And so we want to basically try and bridge that gap between someone who doesn't know those things to someone who eventually is ready for those entry-level roles in the games industry. And so what we've done is all of this is sort of actually quite informed by a resource that we have here at Intergames. It's called the Entry Level Skills Hub. There's a little doobly-doo down there below for you if you're interested in seeing that. The Entry Level Skills Hub is a collection of like kind of well-recognized entry level jobs in the games industry, and then what we've done with each of those jobs is we've looked at portfolios of juniors who have recently been hired into those jobs and said like this is something to aim for. We've got sort of hiring managers and seniors to kind of tell us like what are some of the things that they would expect a junior or an entry level kind of candidate to know and be able to do when coming into that role for the first time. And then what we've gone and done is turned that into a series of events so that you can be the person who sort of these entry-level skills hubs, skills and knowledges allude to. You can have all of that in one nice package. So today we're talking about level design, specifically sort of game theory, and how that feeds into like creating engaging and balanced levels that don't necessarily that don't completely frustrate, but also aren't just so easy breezy that you might as well just be holding down the X button and walking away. And who's going to teach you about level design? Is it you, Jonas? I hear you asking in the comments. No, it's never me. It's never me. It's always somebody else, and today's no different. Joining me today to talk a little bit about level design and everything that I just said is Kevin. Kevin, welcome to the Intergames Discipline Deep Dive stage. How are you? Are you well?
I'm well. I'm doing okay. Hopefully everyone in the chat is doing well too. Um,
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, no, hello everyone. If Are you well? Are you well, everyone? It's not a question I should have just asked you, Kevin. I should have asked everyone. And everyone, you're all valid. You're all valid. Please do tell us how you're doing. Yeah, so Kevin, thanks for joining me here today in the Discipline Deep Dive. Really appreciate you jumping on in. What I'm going to do, Kevin, is I'm not the sort of the star sort of, I don't know, subject of the talk. You very much are as the expert. You are a level designer yourself, and you have come with some things that we could learn from you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you your slides. Huzzah! And Kevin, I'm going to let you basically just kind of teach us what you have to know and sort of with a little introduction, and I'll let you get on with it. Everyone, I'm going to disappear from the stage now. Please treat Kevin with a lot of kindness and pizzazz, and we'll let him get on with it. Thank you so much, Kevin. I'll leave you to it.
Thank you, Jonas. Um, well, hi everyone. I'm Kevin Miles. I'm a tall, white male, originally from Argentina. I'm a ginger too, and my preferred pronouns are he/him. I work as a senior level designer at Wushu, which is a studio based in Liverpool in the UK. And today I'm going to talk to you about creating levels with game theory that are balanced around rational game design using game theory. So, what is game theory? Game theory is a branch of applied mathematics started by John von Neumann, which provides tools to analyze situations in which players choose strategies that lead to different payoffs. And the simplest way we can express a game theory experiment is basically a double entry table where we have two players selecting between two strategies. But this can be, of course, expanded to include a lot more players, a lot more strategies, and it can become quite complex. We are going to try to keep it light today, uh, just so you can get a grasp on what it entails. So one of the most famous thought experiments of game theory is the prisoner's dilemma, which involves considering the options for two criminals that have been caught by the police. They are separated and each are given a choice, which basically um, sums up to either confess and get a lesser sentence or just avoid cooperating, and maybe if the other person confesses, um, you will get like the full sentence and they'll walk free. So what the prisoner's dilemma using game theory tells us is that the most optimal solution for each of the criminals is to confess, because if they confess and the other person doesn't, basically we get to walk free. And if we both confess, then we will get sentenced, but we will get a lesser sentence that we would have gotten if we didn't cooperate. If we don't cooperate and the other person confesses, then we get stuck with the sucker's payoff, which is basically the full sentence. So we always want to confess as the most optimal strategy in this scenario. Um, This game theory was becoming popular around the 40s when the first works around game theory were applied to economics, basically. But then, after a theory of games and economic behavior kind of catch on, it started to be expanded to other areas just as a way of predicting behavior, for example, in international politics and diplomacy, which in 1948 uh, led to Bertrand Russell giving a speech in which he argued that, for example, the best way to stop a nuclear war in the future was to preemptively strike the Soviet Union before they got like nuclear weapons. So in this scenario, we get to explore the limits of the logic in game theory, because mathematically, it makes sense that we want to diminish the possibility of us getting stuck with the sucker's payoff where we are hit first. But real life is a lot more consider different circumstances. And the circumstances will always influence the payoffs in the thought experiment. So, for example, in the prisoner's dilemma, if we were to amend the thought experiment to include the possibility of us getting some kind of consequence for being basically for speaking to the police, in which, for example, our boss would send us someone to kill us after that, then the payoffs change. And when the payoffs change, then our choices also change. So if we were to cooperate, then maybe we'll work free, but probably we'll be dead. So the math says no. There is a very interesting simulation which you can play as a game that I suggest you try. It's called The Evolution of Trust. And basically, it explores a simulation that was put in place to test the limits of game theory, in which a bunch of mathematicians and engineers created algorithms or bots to play the odds of an uh, slightly modified prisoner's dilemma and see which kind of bot was used the most effective strategy. And that bot is included in that simulation, so you get to see how the behavior, what's the behavior that would maximize the odds, and it doesn't always do the same thing. But what does it look when we apply that to games that real people can play? Well, basically, we have games like Subway Squeeze, which the premise is basically to fill a subway car with Tetris-like shapes that are meant to basically act like passengers. And the part that relates to game theory is that one person always acts as the conductor, and the conductor gets to choose the pieces that they can pick to fill their cars with. So the conductor knows which pieces the people need to grab, but at the same time, he knows that he gets to pick last. So the payoff matrix for the conductor is he wants people to not get the pieces that they need, and at the same time, he wants someone to pick the piece that will make them the conductor next, which is a particular one that you put on the station. So that's a representation of the I cut you choose thought experiment in game theory, which is based, for example, on someone cutting a cake and the other person always getting to pick the slice first. You want to cut everything in a way that all the pieces of the cake are the same, but you're never going to achieve that. So you're always like going to be worse off than the person that gets to choose. And how can we use these kind of thought experiments and game theory payoff matrices to explain more complex games, like XCOM, for example? Well, in XCOM, we do have a particular problem that they struggle with, which is that people always chose to play the game very defensively, and they took a lot of turns to complete missions, basically because they weren't being hurried, and also because the game kind of pushes you to do that. So, for example, if we were to look at a level in XCOM and we see the starting zone, which we highlighted there, we have the soldiers which can move, and in XCOM you move. Basically, you can perform two actions with each soldier in each turn. So, what people wanted to do basically was to use the first action to move, and then the second action to go into Overwatch, which allowed them to react to the enemy in the enemy's turn. So in traditional level design theory, you would put the high value positions at the edge of the second, like the dash area, which is basically if you want to get to the high level position, you need to spend both of your action points. And that makes sense because high risk and high reward, right? But here we can see that once you go over the cars, like into like closer to the actual building, then you risk triggering the enemies, which are always located around the center of the map. So what people chose to do instead is use a single movement and then go around the level and face the enemies from a more advantageous position, which in the actual world of the game makes sense because you always are at a disadvantage against the enemies. And in this case, if you go around, you get to be closer to the building by the time you risk triggering a group of enemies. And because there is nothing basically pushing you to hurry, you get to do that. So people naturally chose to do it. And this is exacerbated by another issue that XCOM had, which is the fact that if you do like well in XCOM, you get like better at the game by way of upgrades that you get to your soldiers. You get resources that you can spend on upgrading your base. And if you do like bad in the mission, then your soldiers either die or you fail the mission, and that detracts from your progress in the campaign. And those two cycles create a positive feedback loop if like you do well, and negative feedback loop if you do bad, which also ensure that you will do better or worse in the next mission. um, Made it so people always value a conservative approach that guarantee better odds at doing well, because one does simply ignore the power of compounding. So how can we deal with these kinds of things as level designer? Uh, some levels do try to force you to go in a particular direction towards the enemies, and they do offer you more or less the same choices in terms of cover. So you're not really, you can't really take the long way around or wait and see if the enemies come about because you're always running into them. Here are some other examples. In all of these, you can just go ahead into the center of the level and you are always at the risk of triggering the enemies. And in fact, the one on the left actually got removed from the game in the expansion because it was pretty hard and unfair towards the player. You went straight into a position where the enemies could snipe you from higher ground, and you're always triggering the enemies as soon as you enter the compound. So they changed it in the actual expansion to the game. And other things that the expansion did was to try to entice the player to move faster by introducing a new resource that basically acts as a reward in the campaign. So if you want to do well in the campaign, you not only have to try and do well in the mission, but you also need to capture this resource. Otherwise, you don't get enough resources to develop the technologies that you need to compete against the enemy. And where do they choose to put this resource? Well, they choose to put it in a place that will force you to interact with the enemies and to use the level the way they intended. Because here, the old approach that the player would take was going to the track on the far right and then move to the track on the center of the screenshot and then attack the enemies from there. And doing that took a lot of time. And if you take into account that people only move once and then they went into Overwatch, then it exacerbates the issue. But this sort of changed the payoff matrix in which, yeah, if you're offensive and the enemy is also offensive, maybe you trade shots with them, which is not all something you would do in the regular game, because trading shots with the enemy uh, always hurts you more than it hurts them because of the persistence layer of the game. But now you need to do that to capture the resource. So if you trade shots and some of your soldiers get hurt, then maybe that can be offset by the fact that you got some melt, which is the name of that resource. And you can use that to develop technologies that will help you be more competitive against the enemy in the future. So that sort of worked, but in the sequel, they actually wanted the game to push you even more into playing that way because, from a design point of view, it makes for a more engaging game and more interesting stories if you're actually playing the odds and dashing and trying to like just surviving by the skin of your teeth. So what they chose to do was to make it harder by way of introducing timers to basically every mission. And XCOM did have time missions in the past, but they were very few and far between. And they also had implicit timers in the form of, for example, the terror missions, where you needed to save a bunch of people before they were killed by the aliens, but you chose which ones you wanted to save based on the circumstances you were in. And also, they like the timer didn't count down every round. The timer was actually the amount of people left. So as long as they were alive, you still had time. Uh, in the sequel, by introducing timers and making the mission fail if you didn't manage to complete your goal by the time the timer ran out, what they did was basically um, increase the issues that they had, because now the player is stuck with either playing the way that the designer intended and being punished for it. And the way that that punishment works is, I know this choice is risky, but I need to do it or I will lose. So if I do the choice because the designer forced my hand into doing it and I get punished, I feel bad. And if I don't do it, then I'm punished even more, because losing your entire team or failing the mission and being hit by infinitely respawning enemies feels pretty bad. So, like we could see before with the prisoner's dilemma, this changed the payoff matrix, but instead of like making every option a bit more viable or making the right choice, the choice that the designer wanted from us, more appealing, what it did was make less appealing playing the way they didn't want you to play. Uh, and this feels pretty bad from player's point of view. And the gift is not playing, but this is supposed to be a bunch of ghosts, like many ghosts encircling Pac-Man and killing it, which is the representation for too much difficulty leading to frustration because you don't see a way out of it. And in XCOM, the harder the game is for you, the harder the difficulty it is, then these problems become more and more present. So how can we balance that difficulty and make the game feel well for the player? Um, the method I like to use is called rational game design, and it's based on a game design framework developed in Ubisoft in the mid 2000s that basically breaks down design elements in the game to its most basic components so they can understand the relationships between them and treat each one individually if they need to adjust the difficulty. So, for example, if we look at Mario, we do have an input here, which is the jump, and then we have a bunch of things around the player which act as ingredients. So for example, we have blocks and a pipe which block the jump. We have enemies that you can jump over, or you can jump in the enemies to kill them, or you can have the enemies, if you miss the jump, uh, crash into you and then you die. And then we have the time, which you need to keep track of as you move through the level. So all of that affects the way you play the game, and all of that in combination, different way of combining these elements will create challenges for the player. And these challenges are divided in several categories, and each of these challenges have their own atomic parameters that we can tweak. So a timing challenge, for example, is composed of an anticipation, which is basically the player waiting for something to happen, an opportunity window to act, and the predictability of this. So, for example, if you think about a moving platform, for example, you do have an anticipation where you're waiting for the platform to come to you, and then you have the window of opportunity where you can jump on the platform, and then you have the predictability, which is defined by the time that it takes the platform to go around the set path that the designer put in place. All of this we can use to basically create difficulty in our levels in different ways. So we have the absolute difficulty, which comes from applying an arbitrary value to each of these things. For example, if we have to jump over a gap in Mario, and we know the gap is 3 blocks in width, we can use, like, I like to use a 1, I like to use single units. So for example, 1 for each block that it's missing is 3 in difficulty. Then we have the combined difficulty, which is stacking challenges on top of each other. And this will always like lead to exponential increases in difficulty. So for example, if you think on Mario Maker levels that people make to specifically challenge people that are really, really good at the game, and you see the videos and say, oh, that looks really hard. The mechanics of the things involved aren't complex. It's just that when you combine and stack so many challenges together, the difficulty becomes exponentially higher. And then we have the relative difficulty, which is going through the level, looking at each of the challenges that you set in place for the player, and then averaging that to make the actual like difficulty value of the level. So for example, here we can see from Mega Man, the player being presented with a precision challenge where they need to avoid falling enemies. Then they are presented with a timing challenge in which they need to move through a set of falling blocks that are set to fall on a timer. And then they are presented with both challenges at the same time, which is even made even harder because there is another new challenge that is introduced. And this is very important because, yes, we show the player how each of these things work in isolation, and then we create a challenge that combines the two, so it's naturally harder. But we also don't want to give the player only things they already know, so we put a little bit more of a challenge in the way of a measurement challenge, which is measuring your jumps to avoid falling into the gaps. And all of this creates tension in the player. because they are always giving something new to look forward to. What we want to avoid doing all of this is giving them either a constant challenge, which is what leads to boredom, or too much challenge and frustrating them, like it happened with many people when XCOM 2 came out. And all of this will allow us to create a relative difficulty that mimics what is called the difficulty curve. So if we see here, we will have in an ideal scenario, uh, always a place where we apply difficulty that's higher than the section of the level that came before, which leads to tension in the player because they are presented with a challenge that's harder than the one they mastered before. And then we give them some place to breathe, ideally, so that they don't continue to build tension and spiral into frustration. This will allow the player to remain in the flow state, which is interested in the thing I'm doing right now because I'm challenged and it's new, but it's not so hard that it like completely frustrates me and takes me out of the flow state. And if I get bored, then I get disinterested by the things that the game is presenting to me. Then another thing we need to think about when we design different levels and we propose different solutions to the player is the different profiles, because different profiles will lead to different choices if different choices are allowed by our games. For example, if we were to look at Counter-Strike and we have two different player archetypes, we can see that while the game is a first-person shooter and everyone is aiming and shooting at people and that involves precision, if we take a sniper, the precision is a lot more important than for a shotgunner, for example. So for a shotgunner, because they are going to engage in shorter range shootouts, uh, they are a lot better. They need to be a lot better in reflexes and reacting to the movements of the player before them than the sniper is. The sniper is a lot more stationary in the way that it plays the game. Um, Also, measurement's a lot more important for a sniper because you need to predict the trajectory of the player and you need to time your shot so that it will hit the player. Whereas the shotgunner, timing is important in the sense that reloading and the timing between shots, it's something that you can't afford to, if you miss, you can't afford to reload and you will be at a disadvantage while you get ready to shoot again if you have the enemy right before you. But then precision is not as important because the area of effect of your attack is a lot bigger and you're guaranteed to hit the enemy at some point, and also your damage is a lot higher at that short range. So this leads to people playing very differently based on either their choice that they made or the choice that they were forced to make by the circumstances they found themselves in. For example, here, if we look at a Counter-Strike 2 map, which is very popular, it's called Dust 2. It's been in the game for more than 20 years at this point. Yes. We can see that from the terrorist point of view, which they spawn at the bottom of this map here, a shotgunner will like prefer the bomb site B, and if they need to go A because the rest of the team chose to attack A, then they'll probably want to go through short A, which is a route that guarantees, with a little bit of help and a little bit of luck, that you will have shorter range shootouts than long A. Long A, for someone that uses a shotgun, they basically become useless there. And this is important because we know, or we can intuit, the kinds of choices that someone playing a shotgunner will make. At the same time, the way that the game works, if you're doing badly, you get hit with like an economic penalty in the form of you don't get enough money to replenish the money you spent on your equipment. So you need to buy cheaper weapons, and the cheaper weapons are usually the ones that are shorter range. So teams that are struggling will try to pick mostly B or short A because that fits them better than long A. But you don't want to do that all of the time because then the other team will learn to predict that and they will be waiting for you. And because they have better weapons, if they are waiting for you in the place you chose, you will do badly against them. So you'll either need to rotate or you will lose. But at the same time, because of the catch-up mechanic, if you lose, then you are not going to get all that much worse than what you are not going to be a lot worse off than you are at right now, because you're already at the lowest amount of money you can have, so you can lose and it doesn't hurt as much. But if you win, you pick the right place and you have a little bit of luck and you win, then you get rewarded, and the game starts to balance itself again. And then with more options, your payoff matrix changes. So you get to pick different ways of engaging the enemy. You get to pick different targets, and that keeps the other team guessing. And this evolves organically throughout the game. Um, what I want to mention here is that when you create these payoff matrices, the starting point will always be your informed guess as designer. So you get, for example, to one of the points where the path splits in dust, and you say, well, a player that is here and that has these weapons or these amounts of things like this money, these weapons, these preferences, this is the player archetype. What choice is this player going to make? Well, you fill the payoff matrix with the different options, with values that you as the designer think that each option deserves. And then you correct that through playtesting in the same way that you would estimate in a task in Agile. The point is not really coming up with the perfect answer for those questions. The point is to have a baseline that you can adjust through playtesting. And if you do rational game design and you have definitive absolute numbers for the difficulty and the payoff of each choice, then you can use that as a baseline, which is even better. It's important to always have in mind the player choices. And like I said, as the player circumstances change, they will make different choices. And they might have preferences, but they have preferences that they will default to in um, stress, like struggling environments, and they have preferences that they will default to when they are doing well. Lastly, I want to cover also single player games, like pure single player games, because either in XCOM or the tabletop game that we use as an example, or in Counter Strike, you always have an opponent and you have hidden information. And this is something that it's at the very core of game theory because it was developed around poker as a way of predicting what the other guy would do. But that doesn't need to always apply like in a empiric way to the game. Like you don't need to have an opponent because you are also playing the game with the player. So if you teach the player to do something and they learn to expect that from you, then you can subvert that. And an example like we see here comes from Monkey Island, where they teach you that you can explore the game freely and there is no risk of you dying or losing at any point. So the user learns to expect that, and they use that to basically make a joke to the player, in which you can walk over a cliff and fall to your death, and they present to you, which if you play adventure games at that time, you would know, a menu that is pretty similar to the menus that the Sierra games had when you died there. So players playing for the first time would be quite shocked by this, but then you, like Guybrush reappears on the screen and everything's fine. Well, that's a way of using the expectations of the player in game design, in level design as well. You don't always need to have someone playing against them. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening to me rambling about mathematics and game design.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you for that, Kevin. Yeah, you weren't kidding about the maths elements with all the, yeah, the sort of the charts, plus ones, minus threes, all these too many numbers for me. Too many numbers for me. But I totally respect the sort of references there, especially to XCOM and kind of strategic shooters. You can see a lot of people in chat really related the moment they saw XCOM on screen. We all have trauma from that game, I'm sure. Yeah, thank you so much for all of that, Kevin. We're at like 1:40 at the moment, which means I think we've got some time to take some questions if anyone would like to kind of unleash their inner sort of level designer inside them and sort of learn from Kevin here. So if you have questions, just put them in the comments, the YouTube comments, the chat, and I'll make sure to kind of keep an eye on what's in there. And we'll go through them a little bit. And yeah, just thank you, Kevin, for going all through that. It's really lovely of you. You've put your an email address there in this as well. So if anyone has sort of follow-up questions, I'd sort of suggest one of two actions, which is one, absolutely like follow up with Kevin. There's an email address right there that you can do that. Two, jump into the Intergames community Discord, where I, community manager, as well as a community of 8,000 like students, career seekers, and industry professionals. Everyone in there is like more than willing to jump into different conversations, whether they're specifically about like your coding questions, your art questions, your design questions. We do like a lot of giving feedback on like works in progress and portfolios and CVs and things. So if that's something you're interested in doing, I would hope that we have the description in the YouTube description. Sorry, the link to the Discord in the YouTube description down below. But if we don't, which we don't, I'm just looking at it actually on my laptop because I had to get a secondary device ready. I don't see it there. I'll make sure that everyone gets a little link to the Discord while Kevin is answering a question. So, with that in mind, there are some questions starting to pile through, and I'm just scrolling up to see if we've missed anything earlier in the chat as well. I want to make sure that no one gets missed out on. Cool. Right, thank you, everyone. Yeah, plenty of questions coming through. So we're going to go till 2 o'clock. So obviously, if you do ask a question and it doesn't get read out, I'm sorry, it's just a time constraint. But do jump into the community. Do follow up in an email. Just make sure your question gets heard in some other context, and I'm sure there will be a really wonderful answer waiting for you on the other side. In the meantime, I'm going to just bring it over to you and me, Kevin. There we go. Let's swap us around, and let's bring up a comment from Kyle Broad. Kyle Broad asks, do you use any other game theories to build levels? Now, we might not be able to get into the maths of it, but I'm sure you can drop some keywords or anything that's sort of relevant there.
Yeah, absolutely. When you create levels or designs for your game, I would advise that you don't like constrain yourself to a single framework. Uh, I also use the MDA framework, which is mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, to create my designs. I prefer rational game design because it allows me these it allows me to look at more quantifiable elements that I can, like when someone is struggling with my game, or I do get like a weird behavior from the player, I can look at individual pieces and say, oh, I'm going to adjust this instead of this more of feel-based design of this feels right, this doesn't feel right. So I like that, but I also use the mechanics dynamics aesthetics.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much. I'll keep the questions coming real quickly. So we've got Tom Barrett who has asked the question. So he says, thanks, Kevin. Really insightful stuff. Can you recommend any resources for learning more about rational game design?
Yes, there are several articles about it. I do have in my presentation a link to a very, very deep dive with the people that developed it in Rayman Origins, I think was the first game they used it in Ubisoft. So I don't know if the slides are made available, but if not, you can send me an email and I'll like share the link with you.
Brilliant stuff. And what I'll do, Kevin, if I nab those resources from you as well, I'll make sure that they end up in the Discord because I'm sure there's a dozen people who aren't here who'd really love to read that sort of stuff. Um, Next up, I'm just going sort of like first question asked to latest, so bear with me, everyone. Artoncus has asked, how do you balance sticking to the vision you have for a level or game versus what players might be expecting? For example, from software not budging on their difficulty.
I think when you build a game, it's important to stick to your vision, but at the same time, I don't see the From Software games as unfairly difficult. And this is the thing that you want to achieve by balancing your game and your levels. You want the levels to be maybe challenging, but at the same time, even people that aren't as adept as the hardcore players still can get through Dark Souls, for example, if they are willing to put in the time and learn the game right. And that's because it's well balanced, even if it is challenging. So what you want to avoid by using these methods is to frustrate the player or to be unfair with him or her.
Excellent stuff. Next question comes from Brendan Lochrain. I'm going to butcher that name. I'm so sorry. Brendan asks, in a situation where you're unable to play test your level, how would you recommend iterating on it and working out pain points?
Well, this is one of the areas where rational game design comes in really handy because you start off by looking at the challenges and putting together like the difficulty score for them. Um, I would recommend every chance you get that you do play test your game because that's the only way to confirm your assumption and then tweak the difficulty. But if you can't, then at least you do have a better baseline than just the field-based design. Field-based design needs like necessitates playtesting to be better like fair with the player. Rational game design, you can craft something pretty fair just by your informed guess and basically quantifying the challenges.
Beautiful stuff. Next question for you. We're getting through these nice and fast. Thank you, everyone. Jonah Perry asks, at what stage during the level design process do you think game theory should be considered? Is it during initial concepting or during blockout or maybe at a later point?
This is a contentious answer because I do like to do it at the start. I do like to plan the level and concept it as much spend as much time as possible doing that because you can change your design pretty quickly when you're concepting, where you're sketching on a page and saying, these are the decision points. Players here will choose to do this or that based on their archetypes or their challenges or their circumstances. And you can adjust that pretty fast when you're concepting. When you take it to the blockout stage, then changes to your level are a lot harder and more time consuming. So it's for me, it's better to reach that stage with a framework for your difficulty in the level. So like values, challenges, possible strategies from the player, and then test those assumptions rather than just starting from there.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. Dan Tonkin asks a question which I think really gets into the core of what these talks are about. Um, so the question is, what are some of the base level skills and software that you think a level designer must have or sort of be proficient in, even before they can think of applying for an entry role and level design, and also like what does a portfolio look like for a level designer?
Well, this varies, but my recommendation is using Unreal and Unity, which are the most common tools in the industry. Um, Both have their own ways of blocking levels. Like Unity had Pro Builder, which they built into the engine as a package, and then you have Unreal with the brushes, where you can block out levels and use that pretty much to show like how you handle the line of sight of the player, how you handle the framing in different parts of your level, how you present choices or to the player, like go to the right or to the left, how many choices you present to the player on each part of your level, how do you prevent the player from getting the wrong idea and trying to escape the level or falling to their death without noticing. And then the other part of your portfolio, the one that people can actually either see gameplay in a video or a GIF, which is what I recommend, or if they want to play, they can, is use something that already has the mechanics working instead of putting it together yourself. Like, for example, the Unreal editor for Fortnite is really like it will teach you how to use Unreal to a point because it's the same editor, just a lightweight version in terms of options. And you get all the mechanics from Fortnite, and you get like a scripting language, which is a good practice to have when you look for a job in the industry. But you can also use games that have modding tools, like the ones from Bethesda. Um, in Doom used to be really popular in the past. You would create a WAD, and then if that became popular, you can point to that and say, "I created this," and that's really helpful. If people know your mod, that's really helpful when applying for a job.
Excellent stuff. Thanks for going through all of this so concisely. Now there's two more questions there about like resources, etc. But as you said, you've referenced some things at the beginning of the talk, and I'll get you to send me some stuff at the end, and I'll make that available through the Intergames Discord. In fact, everyone, if you signed up to this event via the Luma page, I can just send you a follow-up email. So I will endeavour to make sure that you get resources via a follow-up email. Someone does jokingly ask, what if that level is a poison swamp, in reference to the FromSoft difficulty. We're not going to get into poison swamps today, but I do appreciate the reference. Where are we? We've still got a few minutes. Let's go for. I've got a question here from a name that I know for a fact I will not do justice to, and I'm so sorry to that individual, but I will ask the question to the best of my ability. How would you avoid the overcorrection in the XCOM scenario? When would you bring in testing and feedback, and how would you utilize it?
I think there's two ways of approaching that. One is the way that the expansion to the XCOM game from 2012 did, which is address it by what we call the positions, the high value positions in a level in XCOM is basically player magnets. You can see this term applied to some other games as well, because we know that those positions are desirable to the player. So what they did was they created a stronger magnet. Basically, they put something that you wanted where they wanted you to go, and they gave you a time limit to get it. And this works because you are still choosing if you want to go and pick it up or not. So if you want to go and pick it up, then and things don't work out for you, then you chose that. Um, but at the same time, if you didn't, then you weren't punished right away. Uh, of course, this is like we saw with the payoff matrix. This doesn't fundamentally change the game, but it helps. Uh, and if we want to address the issue really, we can look at, for example, Phoenix Point, which is a game created by the original creator of XCOM, uh, where they basically made Overwatch be a resource that you could use that detracted from the willpower of the soldier. So, but this is a game design solution opposed to a level design solution. But basically, what they did was If you tell your guy to watch out all the time, then the guy gets jumpy, and because the willpower goes down, and then they will panic, and you don't want that because when they panic, they can do really terrible stuff. So you like were compelled to not spam it all the time.
Yeah, no, don't get jumpy, especially if you're fighting aliens on the battlefield. I think I'm going to take one more question, and then I think that will sort of do it for the talk. Just just take this chance to really say thank you again, Kevin. Thank you so much for jumping onto the Indie Games YouTube channel. Thanks for kind of showing us all of your wonderful teachings and showing us all that incredible game design and breaking down some of the mathematics and the magnetic hooks that exist in video game level design that yeah, really help us understand why we make certain decisions in a level and how they're designed to help us make those decisions easily. Thank you to the wonderful audience. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have learned something here today and you've got some takeaways or some notes or some little follow-ups that you can go away and kind of cultivate into some learnings later on. And thank you for your questions, everyone. It's really meaningful to know that not only have you sort of been here and listened, but that there's just that little bit more you'd like to get out of this talk. And thanks for taking the opportunity to do that. It's just really valuable, I think, to kind of have these forwards and backwards exchanges, especially with industry professionals like Kevin here. The last question that I've got in the chat is where are we? We're from the chat's from Ko Mori. Ko Mori says, when it comes to testing your own creation, how do you adjust for creator bias? Because you know how it works, because you made it.
Yeah, that's one of the big points when it comes to designing is getting someone else to test the game, and then when you watch them test the game, you need to hold yourself from poisoning their opinion of the game or of how things work by saying, no, 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 don't do this, do that instead. You need to be looking over here, which is something that comes natural to a game designer, but you need to avoid it because you want, this is the way I approach it. You want things to go bad because you need to spot the issues and you need to solve them. If I know that it's painful sometimes to watch your assumptions be shattered by the player, but you see, you need to look at it as they trying to help you make a better game. So if they do something that you think is stupid, but in their minds is logical, then you need to like go back. Then you need to take that and go back to the drawing board and change it. Um, in the end, I want to make a better game, and I want the people playing it have fun. That's the reward for me is not someone like playing my level or my game and saying, "Oh, this is a really great level. How intelligent the designer is for coming up with these things." I prefer people to have fun and to say that was really fun. I really enjoyed that, or that level made me think like about, for example, in a game that's mechanically focused, like a Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. That game delivers a pretty powerful emotional message through the mechanics, and I want to achieve that. I want to like have the user feel in a particular way rather than just uh, being the best designer ever and having the most intelligent and complex designs. So I always take the opinions and the feelings of the player into consideration over what I think.
Cool. A lot of what I'm hearing there is like it's basically non-negotiable, right? Like get someone else to feed into these processes. Don't do it all by yourself because yeah, it sounds like having that second opinion is absolutely vital to understanding what effect your level or your design is having on someone else.
Yeah.
Kevin, oh, go for it.
No, no, I just wanted to mention something really quickly, because I know that a lot of the time people don't want to share the game with anyone because they think the game is not ready and they will not get it. or I don't have anyone to test the game, like I'm not part of a community, a game development community, just put it in front of someone, even someone that don't play games, maybe someone that's not part of your target demographic, but get a human to interact with your product and see the assumptions they make.
I'm just taking this opportunity to point out the Intergames Discord in the comments, because I realised I never got round to mentioning that. I am going to shut down questions now, everyone. Apologies if you haven't got a chance to ask your question, but just want to be really mindful of time, especially Kevin's time, who's joined us here today. In the middle of a working week, so I am sort of going to bring it down there, but. I can see that there are still valuable questions being asked in the chat, and I think like these are absolutely the right things just to bring them into the community. Drop Kevin an email, post it on whatever your socials are, and I'm sure a bunch of level designers will absolutely come in and have that kind of conversation with you. Kevin, thank you again for joining us. Audiences, thank you so much for jumping into the chats and hanging out with us. Kevin, is there anything that you sort of want to say before you go? Like, have you got any like initiatives or communities or anything that you in particular just want people to know before we head off? This is your chance to just scream it out into the void.
No, no, but I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone. They have been really nice, and I'm glad I got to meet so many like passionate people that want to go into making beautiful games.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's perfect. Right, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. We'll be back next week with a discipline deep dive specifically for community management, and this is we're going to be sort of going specifically into how do you get feedback from players, like how do you build good surveys, like what are the methodologies about kind of like surveying a community, and how do you build like strategies to support your community and like your player base, etc. So join us next week if that's something that you're interested in hearing about. Until then, like, do jump into the Intergames Discord. I've dropped a little link in the comments, and I'll make sure that there's a follow-up email for all of you, and that will include any sort of resources and tidbits that I can pry out of Kevin's hands after this talk. Thank you once again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Enjoy your weeks, and bye-bye for now. Stream will end